So what happens if you're living in Canada and you have a sole proprietorship business registered in Canada and you want to open a second one? Can you actually do that? The answer is yes, you can have a second sole proprietorship business. You can have a third, a fourth, you could have 20 if you really wanted to. There's no restrictions on how many businesses you can have as a sole proprietor. Now, being a sole proprietor just means you're the single individual owner and the business is tied to you personally. And if you're operating under a business name, then you're registering that business name to yourself. And it's just a trade name, a DBA, doing business as. So ultimately, it's just a human entity conducting business, sometimes under a trade name or a business name. Now, the way it works in Canada is that the federal government gives one federal business number to each entity, each legal entity. So a human entity being a legal entity and a corporation being a legal entity. So if you're setting up a business as a sole proprietorship, then you're conducting business as the human legal entity. And you're only going to get one federal business number, even if you have multiple businesses. So say, for example, you have a sole proprietorship business as a photographer, and you decide you want a second business as a cleaner. So you're going to have both businesses and you're going to be the owner operator. So it can be done. You're just going to register the two different business names with your provincial corporate registry. You're going to stick with your one federal business number. You're not going to get a separate GST account because it's typically only one GST account per legal entity, but you can get a secondary GST number where your account no longer ends with 0001. The secondary one would be your same GST number, but ending in 0002. So then if you want to, you can file the GST separately for your two different businesses. And now when it comes to provincial sales tax, that can vary by jurisdiction because that's always governed on a provincial basis. But typically you can just keep the same provincial sales tax account and just file it all together, or you could request to file it separately. And in some jurisdictions, you might be able to request a separate PST number altogether. So in a way, it's kind of like, it's the same person just wearing different hats. And from a legal structure, it's not really changing. So you might be an electrician by trade, but you're also a father at home and you're also a coach in your free time kind of thing. It's all the same human entity. You just have these different avenues or different hats that you're wearing, different, things that you're engaged in, involved in. So it's the same way with business as a sole proprietorship. You're a cleaner, but you're also a photographer. And so if you do set up this secondary or even a third sole proprietorship business, you can and probably should get a separate business bank account for each business. It's not necessary as a sole proprietorship, but it's nice to have just to keep things separate and then to register each business name with a different business bank account so that you can deposit checks into those respective bank accounts. And now you should get a secondary business license as well, a municipal business license for that secondary business. Of course, depending on the municipality, but that's generally how it works, that each business needs a business license. When it comes to something like insurance, especially if you're doing two completely separate businesses, then you'll likely want two different insurance policies for those businesses, even though they're both tied to you, the human entity. And now when it comes to filing your taxes for those businesses, again, because it's a sole proprietorship, everything is tied to the human. So the business revenue and the business expenses, those are just reported on your personal tax return. So in Canada, if you want to, you can just combine them all on one T2125 form. But if you want, you can also file multiple T2125 forms, one for each business. So again, it is totally possible to have 2, 3, 4 sole proprietorship businesses if you want to. Just make sure that you register them if you're using a trade name and make sure you have separate accounts where needed. And it's also good to have separate records for those separate businesses. So separate bank account, separate bookkeeping, separate T2125, just to keep things separate, especially if they are two fairly distinct businesses. So hopefully this video was useful. If so, please click like and feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel here, where I currently have almost 300 videos that cover business management and business startup topics.